चलो पहले इसका क्वेश्चन उठा लेता हूं, ठीक है। Why did we talk about the labels? We are talking about the labels of secularism. That do we need to look secularism merely in terms of the political dimension? And thus we talked about that when we are talking about the secularism, the three layers with which secularism has to be holistically understood. Holistical matlab all inclusive. And thus we basically talked about the three labels, that is individual, social and a political. Individual is free to cling to any faith. Label of society is society is multi-religious, and polity has to be viewed from two perspectives. One is the Western concept and another is the Indian one. Here we are talking about wall of separation, and here we are talking about all right. Western one, we said it means starting from individual, coming to social and at the political. In India, the first responsibility to maintain secularism lies with the state. There is no religion as such that could be termed as state religion. So we said movement is now going from here to here. So this is Indian context and this is ठीक है ना। तो 2014 वाला जो क्वेश्चन था, हाउ इंडियन कंसेप्ट ऑफ सेक्युलरिज्म डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द वेस्टर्न वन, ये डायग्राम बना देना। ऑलराइट, एनीथिंग एल्स? Let me know if there's any problem so that I can solve it and I can move forward. Or should I move forward from there? All right. We write down few lines in terms of secularism. Communalism we are dealing with. Can I get the last two lines? Read it out. ठीक है, अब थोड़ा सा सुन लेना बेटा. Two dimensions with which this concept was opened up by civil. The one dimension was there in terms of what are the aberrations of secularism, so that we will be talking about the ideology and the practice of communalism. In a one-liner, what I told you that if you are approaching communalism, communalism has basically to be viewed as a notion of incompatibility between the religions. And when we are talking about the two religions seem to be incompatible to one another, then the kind of civilization what the India has fostered, Indian civilization has fostered in terms of the composite culture, the Indianness, the integrative mechanism, that would now be threatened. And that tolerance, pluralism would be undermined. It was the tolerance which has allowed not only the different religions to flourish in the country, but also not to be subjugated by any other religion. Irrespective of numbers, the very spirit of secularism provided that all religions would be having their own equal place in the country. And it was the ethical imperative in part of the state, in part of the government, that whenever the government or the political decisions would be made, religious considerations would be not taken. But the moment any religion would try to establish a relative identity, nurturing the perspective of incompatibility with other religion, The very spirit of pluralism is threatened. The very dynamics of tolerance is finished. Now the intolerance would become the more important. And once any religion becomes intolerant towards another religion, then the pluralism would be threatened, we would not be accepting the existence of another religion. And in this very perspective, I told you that anyone who is talking about the Indian society and its different facets, and more precisely talking about the certain salient features of Indian society. Though we have been making, and we have been very bureaucratic kind of a statement we provided, we will have to accept the facts. And thus I say that I will not hesitate making the sentence that when you say that India is a secular society, let's also accept that India is a communal society as well. Because communalism is a stark reality which has always threatened not only the spirit of secularism, but the very spirit of the national integration. And when you read internal security paper 3, you will find about in internal security, one of the threat to the internal security in India is a communalism itself. The kind of violence which we are witnessing in a communalism, that would be yet another threat to the internal security of the country. In which, quite oftenly, religion is always being used as a political tool to polarize the society. And whosoever are there, their opportunism is basically making them use religion as a tool to bifurcate the two groups of people, the people belonging to the different faiths. And ironically, dear, when you make the statement, the very seed of communalism has been sown during the colonial rule, the divide and rule policies. That during the colonial rule, the nature of communalism was bipolar. It was basically broadly in terms of Hindus and Muslims. But of late, when we are looking at the contemporary reality, I told you that today our understanding of communalism has to be done not merely from the bipolar perspective, but its nature has become the multipolar one. And thus, the first question which was asked to you in UPSC, where anyone, whosoever is now talking about and whosoever is understanding communalism and some dynamics of Indian society, you would not be able to ignore the political dynamics behind communalism. So the question which you read last class 2017, there was a political perspective. Along with the economic causes in terms of the relative deprivation. And thus, 2018, the question which was there that we need to define religion, religiosity and religiousness. And how they turn out to be communal. I hope you remember, I repeat the lines, that religion is merely a belief in a supernatural entity or belief in a power higher than man. In a simple sentence, religiousness is the nature, attribute of being religious. Whereas when we use the word religiosity, religiosity is basically a coherent system of belief and a practice. Having belief in something is not going to culminate into religion. And thus I told you that religion has a two important components. Belief in a power higher than man. And with having the belief in a power higher than man, some prescribed way of behavior leading to the ritualistic practice, which the believers adhere to, the believers are aware of, that become the more important. But when any religious nature, the nature of the person, or when any religion, or the coherent system of belief and practices, that is religiosity, will become intolerant, will not believe in a pluralism, existence of another religion, by promoting the ideology of incompatibility with another religion, looking at another religion with a threat, then the communal ideology will surface. Am I able to make myself clear? So question was there, differentiate between religiousness, religiosity, communalism, and when they turn out to be communal, along with a certain example. I told you that when you're looking at the example, there are numerous examples through which you can pick it up. Right from the partition of the country to 1969, Jabalpur, I told you, Meenakshipuram, we find about that how the certain kind of retroversal movement, which in paper you call about Ghar Wapsi, that has started becoming important. More precisely during the Babri Masjid demolition, we find about a huge kind of communal violence taking place, engulfing the entire country. Then the Meerut to Jamshedpur. The certain examples are there where we are finding about it how communal violence is emerging. The kind of intolerance that is now emerging in a society, which is threatening the very existence of the society. But despite this, I'll once again repeat the concept. If I could quote Oscar Ali Engineer, the trends in communalism, sometimes when you are in UPSC and when you will grow a bit old in UPSC, and you will come across a magazine that is called EPW, Economic and Political Weekly. You will find that quite oftenly Oscar Ali Engineer writes on that one. And I quote one line from Oscar Ali Engineer's Trends of Communalism, that people in India are religious, they are made communal. In all the sides of religion, he continues, he says, in all the sides of religion, there are the people who basically love peace. But any opportunistic perspective, either led by the politicians or by the religious leader or by the economic entrepreneurs, whenever religion would be used as a tool, political tool for a certain kind of motivating, the motive attribution, communalism will show its dark phase. Violence would be followed by it. And in this very perspective, the political to economic dimension that has to be picked by us. Am I fine up to there? And then I said that most precisely from 9/11 incident, the term religious fundamentalism has started finding expression. But when we are looking at Indian society, particularly from the decades of 70s, a new kind of communalism, mind my word, a new kind of communalism surfaced, which we refer as fundamentalism. All right? But I told you, in the last 3 days, this is the 4th day with me, that whenever any concept comes, you basically try to understand the concept not merely from the positive or negative dimensions. Open up all the dimensions. No concept could be purely positive, no concept could be purely negative. You need to endeavor, you need to work where you would be able to understand the positive and negative, both the dimensions. And thus, in our discussions of communalism, we will be talking about the fundamentalism as well. So let's first pick up the religion and then come to the fundamentalism. All right? So change the paragraph. दसा, हाँ? अब सुनो, 2-3 दिन और, हाँ? फिर लौटूंगा, जल्दी लौटूंगा. कुछ प्रायर एंगेजमेंट है, उसको थोड़ा निपटा के आता हूँ, ठीक है. Let me remind you, we started with the salient features of Indian society, and steadily we came to secularism. And the moment I said that anyone who is talking about the secularism in your first paper, the 4 concepts which have been written in a row, the maximum questions which have come out from the secularism was a bit conceptual that you are comfortable with now. The political dimension, relative deprivation, religion, religiosity, with which communalism has been approached by civils, that conceptual dimension is there. This year 2023, when they have asked you in terms of post-liberal economy, ethnicity and other kind of perspective, then I told you that one of the major difference that you will have to understand that if communalism has emerged out of relative deprivation and poverty, then fundamentalism tends to grow with economic prosperity. And look at the irony. the emerging economic elite of the group, who himself has witnessed the process of modernization, tends to make the believers move toward traditionalism. Because if fundamentalism is a conservative religious revivalism, then the person who has marched towards the progressivism, but the group which he is representing, he wants the group to be moved to the traditionalism, going back to the basics of the realism. Clear, right? And in this very perspective, the line will have to remember that it is still operating as a false consciousness engineered by the opportunistic religious, political, and the economic interest of the contending groups and factionalism in India. But it is not only, communalism is not only one of the threats where we could witness the Indian society at crossroads. Yet another challenge which the Indian society has been facing, that is basically regionalism. And of late means recently, of late when we are looking at the kind of domicile, the type of son of the soil ideology that is being propagated, is basically undermining the very constitutional promise granted to the citizen of the country. I, as a citizen of the country, is free to shift, to settle anywhere in the country, unless and until the law forbids it. But in the son of the soil ideology, the more the way the violence is perpetuated to assert the local's identity over another, a kind of culture assertiveness is emerging out. Maharashtra for the Marathis, Assam for the Assamese, Bihar for the Biharis. And where the violence is the natural outcome. This is basically denial of the constitutional promise what the constitution has granted to the citizen of the country. And the nature and texture of regionalism has always impacted the socio-political structure of the Indian society. When we are looking at the pre-British phase, we find about that how the country was basically divided into the different kingdoms, dynasties. And somewhere the parochial nationalism was there. Parochial means limited. People who belong to certain dynasty, they had their loyalty to that dynasty. But when India became a colony of the Britishers, and the Britishers established themselves in India in terms of politico-administrative dimension, in the entire length and the breadth of the country, one penal code system emerged. Getting me? The parochial nationalism now came to the broader nationalism of the country. Am I able to make myself clear? Even how to govern, if you look at, अगर history में थोड़ा सा पढ़ेंगे, तो 1872 Scheduled District Acts पढ़ेंगे, excluded, partially excluded areas, we'll find about the certain dimensions of regionalism over. The genesis of Khalsa in Punjab, alright, the birth of Justice Party in Chennai, Madras, are the certain expressions of regionalism in a pre-independence era. But particularly when you come to the independent era, after independence, regionalism and the demands of separate state, acceptance by the government, political structure, that became a reality. दो लाइन बोलूंगा, दोनों को ठीक समझना बेटा. When we got independence, if I am not wrong, approx 500 larger, bigger, medium princely states were merged to persuade, to fetch, or in pursuance with the broader nationalism. Alright? क्या हो गया मेरे भाई? Why even not a 1 decade of your independence has passed? Alright? Regional reorganization of the states were conducted. 1956-57 पॉलिटी पढ़े होंगे तो फैजल अली कमेटी आई होगी, स्टेट रिऑर्गेनाइजेशन. So from there, what has happened? What in 1 decade, not even 1 decade of Indian independence has passed. And you merge all the princely states in pursuance of the broader nationalism. And just after the 6 years, the linguistic reorganization of the state started taking place in a society. Right? So the factors are to be understood. Factors are to be understood not merely from the demands of the state, but also from the political compulsion as well. And RNEB, that most of the times the demands of the separate statehood which has been recognized, which has been accepted, only the two factors have played the important role. The ethnic hegemony and the linguistic affiliation. All right. Now the questions would be which are coming to you is there in terms of what would be the criterion to create a state? है ना? The NCR region where I live in Delhi, that is basically in Uttar Pradesh. And you might have gone through, it is always been demanded that Uttar Pradesh is such a huge, big state that it is too difficult to manage this politically. So what the people are demanding? They are demanding that it should be divided into 3. Clear, right? Harvard University. Recently there was one work and with a very huge sample. I love the article double XL versus double XS. This is the size which we go through today. Tailor is gone, so whenever you go to any shop or mall, all right, the size is S, M, L, double XL. Now the plus size is coming out, all right. So double XL versus double XS and euphoria for the new state. All right, I quote one line from that article that around the globe we do not have any conclusive data to prove who does better, large or a small state. Getting me? And if we do not have any conclusive data to prove who does better, then we now need to look at the very perspective of regionalism from the 2 dimensions. One is basically to look in terms of aesthetic analysis. All right? And the second perspective that has to be understood is from the dynamic dimension. I don't know how we'll react. 3 दिन में तुमको ठोक बजा के ऊपर ला दिया हूं मैं, राइट? तुम्हारी सोच मैंने बदली है 3 दिन में, 3 दिन में और बदलूंगा. Can regionalism be viewed merely as an internal process? Take your time, take your time. Or should we also look at regionalism in terms of the external influences as well? नहीं, मेरी बात क्लियर हुई? अगर खालिस्तान है, is it only merely the Indian perspective, or we need to look it from outside? Issues of Tamil in Sri Lanka, we find about it. Clear, right? Regionalization and globalization have intertwined with one another. All right? The kind of distance what the globalization has eroded. Getting me? Deterritorialization has emerged. Deterritorialization, territories are gone. A borderless world is emerging up. Anything happening, any remotest part of the globe has its repercussions on other parts of the globe as well. ठीक है? इसका मतलब है तुमको जो रेंज ऑफ क्वेश्चन है सिविल्स में जो पूछा गया वो पॉलिटिकल डायमेंशन से तो है ही है, दोनों तरफ से पूछे, एक पॉजिटिव डायमेंशन से भी. ठीक है? प्रॉब्लम क्या है मेरे भाई? ठीक है, अब जिसने भी मुझे बोला था सर बीजू जी हिंदी बोलने वो खुश होना चाहिए, हाँ, तो थोड़ा दांत भी दिखलाओ मुझे. कोई बात नहीं है. नाउ कमिंग बैक, पहले एक डायग्राम बनाते हैं, फिर रीजनलिज्म को लेते हैं। चेंज करो बेटा इसको, टाइम हो भी गया है। आई एम इंजॉइंग योर बैच फ्रॉम स्टडी। 2 दिन तो तुम लोग मुझे देखते रहे है? मैं बोलते बोलते इधर से आधा से ज्यादा ब्रेन मेरा सोच रहा था ये समझ रहा है कि नहीं समझ रहा है? कल से तुम लोगों की हंसी लौटी है। तो मैंने आपको बोला था 2 दिन दो मुझे, 2 दिन में स्पीड से, लैंग्वेज से, कंटेंट से है। आज तुम ज्यादा फ्रेश हो, कल और फ्रेश होगा। और ऐसा नहीं है कि कल मैच देखने चले जाना, कल इधर ही मैच है ना, तो मैच देखने मत चल जाना, इधर ही रहना। चलो ठीक है बेटा, एक और जोड़ दो बेटा। बनाओ, you just write it down. I'll just take 2 minutes, I'll come back. All right, we'll beginning from the conceptual clarity, and then we'll be looking at the nature of question, because the questions which have been there, which I had asked you to go through, you could have realized that the questions are not very easy in terms of reasoning. I told you that prima facie, the moment you look at the question, you feel that you know it. But the major difficulty is how to write that in 100 words, for which the conceptual dimension, conceptual clarity seems to be the most significant one. And you need to struggle in developing the concepts, because as the days are gone where the factual questions are there. I told you the facts will always find their locations within the concept. So we'll first struggle. I'll struggle to make you understand. You'll have to struggle to understand that where I'm taking you and why that is needed. I said that if anyone is now in a contemporary socio-political narrative, if he is looking at, one of the challenges or phenomena that will come across in the writings of the socio-political analyst would be the concept of regionalism. Having the loyalty towards one particular region. And if you remember, when we started talking about the diversity, I said that the Constitution has never asked us to relinquish our previous identity. We are first something else, then we are Indian. And being something else is not a hindrance to be an Indian. And I had said you very firmly that we cannot be an Indian without becoming something else. We are first something else, then we are an Indian. For which we had used the salad bowl model. Can I say that when we are looking at the phenomena of regionalism, we also need to understand the diversity of the country. Diversity in terms of cultural practices, diversity in terms of the dress pattern, diversity in terms of the language, diversity in terms of the religious affiliation. These all factors have to be brought in our understanding of regionalism. Okay? But somewhere, when we talk about regionalism, or when we talk about the broader nationalism, then the duality has also to be understood. Duality in the sense, if at one hand we are talking about nationalism, then we are also talking about regionalism. Preference for the regional culture rather than the broader nationalism. And therefore, jaldi kar. And therefore, we first need to look at the certain ambiguities of academics. And when I say ambiguity of academics, then I don't know whether you people have realized it or not. The moment you start looking at the books, you find it that somewhere the term reason has been used as a need it may emerge. The way broadly or vaguely the terms have been used in terms of Arctic reason, Antarctic reason, plain reason, gangetic reasons. It also makes us understand that are we understanding these concepts or these zones, what we are referring in terms of reason, merely from the geographical boundary? Or do we need to bring something more to understand the concept of regionalism more holistically? I still say that how to define reason is the most difficult one. If we approach what is reason, can I say that reason is any homogeneous area which on the basis of the physical characteristics and cultural characteristics seems to be distinguished from the neighboring areas? Getting me? If you say physical characteristic, then we are looking at a certain boundary, we are looking at a certain kind of geographical. But it is also the cultural dynamics, cultural characteristics that has also to be brought within it. Seems to be distinguished from the neighboring area. Alright? And out of this distinguishedness, if the we feeling emerge for that particular reason, it could simply be termed as regionalism. Alright? It means regionalism is an ideology that manifests the loyalty toward that particular reason. Clear है मेरी बात यहाँ से? And once we say we feeling, now the first question comes out, how to view reason? Either we are talking about the physical characteristics or we are talking about the cultural characteristics. Does the concept of reason seems to be static? Alright. The moment we raise this question that is it a static one, then the first explanation which comes out is called mainstream perspective. What does the mainstream perspective say? The mainstream perspective says reason is as it is. Getting me now? But the moment the new kind of works started taking place around the globe, we find about that the concept reason is not static, it is a fluid concept. क्वेश्चन सब याद आ रहा है? तुमको क्या पूछा गया? कास्ट एज स्टैटिक एंड फ्लूइड वन. अब रीजन को मैं स्टैटिक एंड फ्लूइड पे लेके आया हूं. आप वहां तक बढ़िए, वहां तक पहुंचिए क्वेश्चन को समझने के लिए. And thus, opposite to the mainstream perspective, the another perspective came out to view reason is called constructionist perspective or critical perspective. Both the words you can use it. लाइन को ठीक से सुनना बेटा, ठीक है, और गौर से सुनना इस लाइन को, भूलना नहीं इस लाइन को. reason is not as it is. Rather, reason is socially constructed, hence politically contested. Okay? It is socially constructed and politically contested. Clear hai? In which the actors from within and actors from outside both can play roles. ठीक है ना? How the actors construct the reason is the most significant one. Thus, concept has not to be viewed in a static dimension. Clear है मेरी बात यहाँ से? And therefore, I said that today when we are looking at, you'll find about the concept that is called neo-regionalism. And therefore, in terms of the dynamism inherent in our understanding has to be focused, highlighted by us. And how to understand that? It has to be viewed both from the indigenous and exogenous perspective. When you say indigenous, inside out, अंदर से बाहर लाए. Exogenous, from outside in. All right? And in the contemporary globalized world, once again I repeat the line, regionalization and globalization seems to be intertwined, and that has happened due to the global transformation. Clear है? ठीक है, पहले यहाँ तक क्लियर है सिंपल में. हाँ बोलो बेटा, क्या बोल रहे थे? क्या ह्यूमैनिटी? कोई नहीं. I had requested them and it is also for you. When I am extempore, hold on your question. ठीक है, write it down. If you miss the question, write down so that once I ask you, ask the question to me. Now coming back, how to view region is fine, but थोड़ा समझ लेते हैं. Two models of explanation are there. Either we are looking at the Balkan province, or we are looking at the Eastern Pakistan, or we are looking at Balochistan, or anywhere in the world. We find that some sort of regionalistic demand should be incorporated. If the nation is unable to incorporate the regionalistic demand, society will collapse. All right? Right to dissent, DISSENT, is a democratic right of us. All right? Out of the dissent, we can assemble, we can get we can protest. Isn't it? So if any area feels that relatively they are deprived, economic backwardness persists, political structure is unable to solve their problems, they do have the right to dissent, to raise their concerns. Clear, right? So the first model says that some sort of regionalistic demand should be incorporated and entertained. Why? Because it reflects democratic urge. It smoothens economic development. And it basically provides political administrative efficiency. Okay? But the moment this model came out, explain. Parallelly, the another model came out that is called Balkanization of a state. Okay? And the Balkanization of a state basically propagated that a single fragmentation would lead to further fragmentation in society. Let the society accept one demand. Further demand from the different quarters of society will start emerging out. I always say that the creation of Telangana as a separate state, it opened a Pandora box in India. Right? and demands started of the new states, separate statehood from the different parts of the country. All right. What the theory has said? Single fragmentation would lead to the further fragmentation. All right. Now, in this very perspective, some questions comes out. How many states does India need? पहला क्वेश्चन तो ये पूछना पड़ेगा. The second question that we'll have to ask, who does better? Large or small state? But the most important question that we'll have to ask, that what should be the criterion of creating a state? Should it be merely the ethnic hegemony? Or should it be merely the linguistic affinity, which has been the prime concern here? Not denying the fact that ethnic hegemony and linguistic affinity has been a prime concern. Culture assertiveness in regionalism is emerging out. Now people are asserting their culture. And they are not merely asserting their culture, but the kind of ideology that is being propagated is basically the division between us versus they, local versus outsiders, right? And in pursuance of this division, what they have done in terms of local versus outsiders, the locals perpetuate to the violence on the outsiders, right? And this violence is basically to assert identity of the locals over the outsiders, which many times is fueled politically. Okay? When we are looking at the work which I said, double XL versus double XS, euphoria for a new state. I like this work because that was more analytical, that was more rational. It says one of the factors that has to be taken care of while creating any state is the economic criterion as well. So when we are looking at some of the things, election time है अभी, है ना? Free बीज चल रही है. You to be able to understand that. When you look at the economic criterion, every new state will require a domestic market. All right? Every new market will require the procedures to generate the resources. All right? Every new state will require a network of welfare policies to be implemented. All right? And thus I always say that Indian democracy, or whosoever in the political party, whosoever at the helm of the political affairs in the country, they should be elastic as well as rigid. It means Indian constitution or judiciary, politico-judiciary system has to, or judicial system has to be elastic as well as rigid. Elastic in the terms of incorporating the genuine demand. Okay? And to understand, to incorporate that genuinity of the demand, even if ad hoc SRC has to be created. Alright? It should not merely be left to the political hands. Okay? Telangana, it has been there in the course of history. British time से ही चल रहा है बेटा. 1930 you find about the Sangam created, all right, and the Telangana movement is there. Telangana movement has a different place in the history of movement in India. ठीक है? Congress, left party also came out. RS Samaj joined it, all right, to oppose the AIMM. Getting me? And particularly after the Operation Polo, Hyderabad was annexed. ठीक है ना मेरी बात बेटा? But Hyderabad basically provided an ideological dimension, that is government of the peasants. है ना? which you could find in Naxalism as well. Third paper ले गया बेटा मैं तुमको. मैं पहले दिन मिला था आपको क्या बोला था? With me the syllabus of the boundary of the syllabus has to be broken. है ना? But when the Telangana was created after so many promises by the so many political parties, did we really carve out Telangana in a better manner? No capital, no complete bifurcation. Am I able to make myself clear? That's why once again I am saying that when we are looking at the demands of the separate statehood, genuinity of the demands has to be dealt by the ad hoc SRC. Even if it will be their time frame, you say that after 6 months they will submit their report and even that will be dissolved. But it should not merely be left to the political wills of the politicians. Clear है मेरी बात यहाँ से? And in this very perspective, some factors are to be looked on. First factor which I said, the first factor is diversity of the country itself. Right? Economic contour of the country itself, that diversified economic contour, relative deprivation, economic backwardness, political insufficiency, alright, growing regional assertiveness and a political party. I know. And today, nativistic ideology of the natives, which we are calling to be the son of the soil. ठीक है? अब एक क्वेश्चन खोलो रीजनलिज्म का, then I'll give you something. No, we are not talking about the Indian society. We are talking about regionalism. So that's why I say that we'll have. We need the cultural dimension. We need the social dimension as well.
We need to write multi-dimensional or multi-tasking.
Multitasking means what?
We should write.
We should write that in a holistic manner, not merely from the physical dimension. Region has not to be understood merely from the physical boundary. It has to be understood in terms of the cultural aspiration.
The correct term that we should use.
That's why I say physical and cultural characteristics. हाँ बच्चा, एक क्वेश्चन इसको कैसे घुमाया बेटा? there are pockets of mini India in the India. ऐसा एक क्वेश्चन है बेटा. हाँ बोलो. son of the soil ideology लाना बेटा, है ना? लिंग्विस्टिक हेजेमनी लाना है. ऑल इंडिया रेडियो बोलते हैं ना, आपको मालूम है, मुझे मालूम है, आप लोगों को मालूम है नहीं. इट वाज फर्स्ट डिक्लेयर्ड टू बी आकाशवाणी, and then it was said that how the term Hindi be imposed, and thus it was dropped and we adopted all India radio. All right, so the northern southern linguistic divide is still there. ठीक है? उसका एक नया कंटेम्पररी एग्जांपल अभी क्या चल रहा है बेटा? 3 language formula of the new education policy 2020. All right, and that way the debate is going on. Most of the CMs of the southern states, they have written to the PM that the 3 language formula has not to be implemented over there. That has to be changed on that very part. Getting me now? So in this very perspective, this cultural assertiveness has to be talked about. Religious dimension has to be talked about. When we're looking at the Khalistan, it is basically theocratic state, demands of the theocratic state, a state based on religion. Pagana? Yes. We are talking about in terms of ethnic dimension. We are talking about in terms of the security issues. We are talking about in terms of the economic developmental issues. All right. So that way, it is basically talking about homogenization. है? ये नहीं हो सकता है. If you look at most of, suppose if you are talking about the Manipur tribal conflict, is not somewhere the certain perspective of clinity is emerging out? So we are basically talking about the process of homogenization. It is too difficult in a globalized era to propagate the homogenization process, all right? Because heterogeneity is a feature of the society, composed of the different groups, different faiths, different religion, languages. Any attempt to bring about homogenization would ultimately be threatening the very fabric of diversity. होगा ना? सबसे पहले बोस्निया हर्जगोविना बहुत पुराना, जहां से एक वर्ड आया कंसेप्ट, इतनी क्लिनिसिटी, तुत्सी बुरुंडी वाला डोमेन में अगर पुराना, बहुत पुराना है, जहां से कंसेप्ट शुरू हुई, ठीक है, जेनोसाइड शुरू हुआ, एथनिक जेनोसाइड शुरू हुआ, कि जो हमारे जैसा नहीं उसको मार देंगे. तो भाई आप उस एरिया को होमोजेनाइज करना चाह रहे हैं, कर रहे हैं ना. दैट डाइवर्सिटी इज नॉट बीइंग टॉलरेटेड. Am I able to make myself clear here? All right, write down few lines. Yeah, please. हाँ, फैजल अली याद रखना, 1956-57 वो लिंग्विस्टिक रिऑर्गेनाइजेशन ऑफ द स्टेट गया. तो कुछ पेजेस, ठीक है, अच्छा क्वेश्चन पूछा ना, कुछ पेजेस में ब्रॉडली बता दूं तुमको. जैसे 60s का फेज, 56 वाला पेज देखेंगे तो फैजल अली कमेटी लिंग्विस्टिक रिऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जैसे मध्य प्रदेश और ये सबको देखो. 70s में जब हम आते हैं, लेट 70s में, तो नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न स्टेट रिऑर्गेनाइजेशन एक्ट बनती है नॉर्थ ईस्ट के ट्राइबल इंसर्जेंसी को देखने के लिए, जहां से आंध्रा शुरू हुई 1956 वाले डोमेन में. वो एथनिक हेजेमोनी का एग्जाम्पल है. क्लियर है मेरे पास? एंड देन वी फॉलोड दिस फेज इन टर्म्स ऑफ 3 states. One is where you are living, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Uttarakhand, all right? Then by the Telangana, and the latest phase in a regionalistic perspective that we have done, that was there in terms of delimitation in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, है ना? ये फेज हुआ बेटा, ठीक है. और इस फेज में पॉलिटिकल कंपल्सन को लेके आना जरूरी है, कल्चर असर्टिवनेस को लेके आना जरूरी है. I remember a few years back when the agitation by MNS in Maharashtra was very high in Bombay. I was there in Bombay, all right, and I have seen the kind of violence which is being perpetuated over there. ठीक है. That time that agitation collided with the railway exam. Most of the outsiders, the candidates who had to take the railway exam, they reached to Victoria Terminal over there. And the moment they got out the train, they were beaten up. All right. When if such kind of cultural assertiveness is coming out, that if you need to be there, you need to understand the local language. You'll have to speak the local language. All right. Now, if you look at Haryana and other states that has come there, what the states are now coming up in their own populist policy, they are coming out that 70% seats should be reserved for the locals, isn't it? These are the certain perspectives, and that's why then when we are talking about regionalism, and whenever we talk about that, what would be the criterion to create a state? Political compulsion can never be ignored in a regionalism. All right. Aspirations of the people will always be fueled by the certain political party. ठीक है ना? तो वहां रेशनलिस्टिक तुमको लिखना है that what should be the criterion to create a state. ठीक है? थोड़ा सा लिखो तो शायद तुम आ जाओगे. छोटा छोटा यूनिट है? हाँ. Well, no, it has to be looked in terms of that whether there is a genuinity of the demand or not. All right. You do have a right to dissent, but the dissent has to be fructified in terms of your demands which you are creating, demanding a separate state. Let the SRC decide it. All right. Because all the local parties would be there in Vidarbha, they will certainly be propagating. They will always be fueling that one. ठीक है ना? So whether it be socially, culturally, politically, economically, administratively feasible or not. इसीलिए मैंने क्वेश्चन आज आपको बोला आपको, हाउ मेनी स्टेट डज इंडिया नीड? कहीं ना कहीं एक क्राइटेरियन बेस तो करेंगे ना कि दिस इज द क्राइटेरियन व्हिच आर टू देयर. And a mere ethnic and linguistic affinity, Indian democracy or Indian constitution will have to rigid enough to deal sternly with the mere cultural assertiveness of the people. And particularly if the violence is being perpetuated to assert the local's identity over the outsiders, that should be dealt with. Alright. इसीलिए मैं फिर बोल रहा हूं that elasticity and rigidity both is required. है ना? Father then. ठीक है? Alright? सुन लो फिर. अब थोड़ा सा 100 वर्ड्स में लिखना है तो थोड़ा सा माइजर यूज करते हैं. How to define regionalism? What I told you that whenever you find any word in which ISM is written, then your perspective to understand would be the ideology. ठीक है? अब लाइन बोलता हूं ठीक से सुनना. Regionalism can broadly be conceptualized as an ideology and a political movement. ये रिपीट कर रहा हूं. Can be conceptualized an ideology and a political movement advancing the concerns of a particular reason. Right? However, in a globalized era today, when the boundaries of the nations have shrunk, our understanding of regionalism has to be from outside in and inside out. All right? Which we are basically looking in terms of global transformation. यहां तक ठीक है बेटा? अब तुम्हारा एक यूनिट है, कल मैंने बोला था, फिर याद दिलाता हूं. Impact of globalization in Indian society. होगा ना? Now the question will be there that we will be looking at globalization merely from the economic phenomena. Or should we also be talking about cultural globalization? We'll also be talking about political globalization. A new political order is emerging out, है ना? मैनेक्विन समझते हो? उधर जो कपड़ा दुकान की तरफ है ना. Most of the political heads of the world, they are working as a mannequins in the hands of the TNCs, transnational corporations. क्लियर है मेरी बात? क्वेश्चन बैंक है. 2018 में जाओ और 2019 में भी जाना. 2018 का क्वेश्चन है कल्चरल होमोजेनाइजेशन, हाउ द कल्चरल स्पेसिफिकेशन इज इमर्जिंग इन इंडिया. ऐसा करके क्वेश्चन है बेटा. ठीक है? 2019 में जाना. एक क्वेश्चन लिखा हुआ है, आर वी लूजिंग आवर लोकल आइडेंटिटी ओवर ग्लोबल आइडेंटिटी. है बेटा? अभी जितना थोड़ा बहुत रीजनलिज्म समझे उससे भी जोड़े क्या उसको. ग्लोबलाइजेशन का कुछ काउंटर मूवमेंट तो होगा ना बेटा? है? पहला काउंटर मूवमेंट तो इन्वायरमेंटलिज्म ही है. होगा ना? कभी ग्रीन मूवमेंट सुना है? नहीं. बोलो बेटा, कौन बोल रहा है? डरो मत, बोलो. What is green movement? नहीं आया? Green movement is basically environmental movement. है? मैं ये जानने के लिए आपको ग्रीन मूवमेंट नहीं उठाया था. I wanted to add something. Alright? Green is an alternative to red and blue model of development. ठीक है? Blue model of development is a capitalist market orientation development. Red model is a state managed one. The kind of havoc both of द पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजी इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम हैज क्रिएटेड ऑन एनवायरमेंट, उसका अल्टरनेटिव ग्रीन हुआ, है ना। एंड चार्ल्स रिक वाज द वन स्कॉलर हु रोट अ बुक ग्रीनिंग ऑफ अमेरिका in 80s, and from there environment become a political agenda. ठीक है ना। तब जब आप मिड 80s में आते हैं तो सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट का कंसेप्ट आ जाता है ना, क्लियर है। उसके बाद पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ सस्टेनेबिलिटी जानना होगा सोशल डायमेंशन से। आपको मैंने क्या बोला था, जहां जहां जिसका एरिया है साइंस टेक इन्वायरमेंट में वहां तक पहुंचा दूंगा, छोड़ दूंगा आपको, ठीक है ना। जैसे मुझे मालूम नहीं है इन्वायरमेंट इक्वालिटी हुआ है, सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट थोड़ा सा पढ़ा है, राइट। अवर कॉमन फ्यूचर का क्वेश्चन पीटी में भी था ना। ब्रंटलिन कमीशन, जहां से फर्स्ट ऑफिशियल डेफिनेशन ऑफ सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट कम्स आउट। अभी 2 लाइन बोलता हूं, दोनों को ठीक से सुनना, और रीजनलिज्म से लेके अलग ढंग के ग्लोबलाइजेशन तक जाना है, सब यूनिट को जोड़ता चलूंगा। ब्रंटलिन कमिटी में एक लाइन लिखी हुई है बेटा, Northern hemisphere lifestyle cannot be replicated anywhere in the world. तो अभी पॉलिटिक्स सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट का क्या है बेटा, नॉर्दर्न सदर्न हेमिस्फीयर डिवाइड होगा ना, एफ्लुएंस वर्सेस पॉवर्टी। तो जब हम जोहान्सबर्ग में आए, जहां से हमने आवर कॉमन फ्यूचर का कंसेप्ट दिया ना, उधर एक लाइन लिखा हुआ बेटा, वर्ल्ड बैंक का रिपोर्ट में बोल रहा हूं, that what an additional Indonesian American will consume is 300 times higher than what an additional Indonesian consumes. ठीक है। अब तो हम लोग एक क्वेश्चन तो पूछ ही सकते हैं ना बेटा, that the threat to our common future comes from where? Is the threat coming from poverty? Because if you are talking about poverty, all right, then we are talking about the northern hemisphere countries, होगा ना। और तब कैसा पॉलिसी बनाए, कैसा आइडियोलॉजी बनाए, that poor are responsible for their poverty due to their larger families। है बेटा, है क्वेश्चन बैंक खोलो, तुम लोग यूनिट से पढ़ते हो, टॉपिक से पढ़ते हो, मैं तुमको यूनिट बोल रहा हूं, एक यूनिट है इंडियन सोसाइटी। एक क्वेश्चन है बेटा, विच इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल, पॉपुलेशन फॉर द पॉवर्टी और पॉवर्टी फॉर द पॉपुलेशन। 2015 पढ़ बेटा क्वेश्चन। है क्लियर हुआ मेरी बात? अरे अभी आएंगे उस पर, पहले एक लिंक समझ लेते हैं। इफ यू से पुअर्स आर रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर देयर पॉवर्टी ड्यू टू देयर लार्जर फैमिलीज, तो क्या करोगे, कोर्सिव अप्रोच पे लाओगे। कोर्सिव समझ ना, ठीक है। और अगर इफ यू से एफ्लुएंस इज द कॉज ऑफ और थ्रेट टू आवर कॉमन फ्यूचर, देन यू वुड बी हैविंग द सजेस्टिव वन, होगा ना। ये पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट बोलते हैं इसको, ठीक है। और जहां से ग्लोबलाइजेशन इंटेंसिफाई होता है, सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट स्ट्रांग होते हैं ना। अभी मैं एक लाइन बोलूं, उसको सोचना है बेटा, मेरा एरिया नहीं है, मैं कल तुमको सोचने, सोशल डायमेंशन से सोचने के लिए छोड़ दे रहा हूं। व्हाट इज सस्टेनेबल टू समवन कैन बी नीड डिस्पोजिशन टू समवन एल्स। है मेरी बात क्लियर हुई? Hence, what is to be sustained will always be debated. Whichever country will protect its own interest in a global world will be getting the maximum benefits out of it. ठीक है ना। कल मैंने क्या बोला था और आज ही बोला आपको, one of the factors for the rise of fundamentalism is globalization. लाएंगे तो रिलीजियस डायमेंशन होगा, ड्यू टू द ऑनगोइंग रैपिड चेंज विद द पीपल, सम ऑफ द पीपल फील दैट दे वुड बी अपरूटेड फ्रॉम देयर पास्ट, ऑलराइट, द सर्टेन प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ द रीजन दैट मे स्टार्ट। तो थियोक्रेटिक डिमांड शुरू हो जाएंगे, ये है। और रिलीजन लिंग्विस्टिक डायमेंशन का प्रिजर्वेशन ऑफ कल्चर का डिमांड जब करने लगेंगे आप, है, कास्ट कॉन्शियसनेस हो जाएंगे, लोकल आइडेंटिटी वुड बी प्रमोटेड। तो कल्चरल स्पेसिफिकेशन इन रिस्पॉन्स टू कल्चरल होमोजेनाइजेशन विल इमर्ज आउट। इसीलिए फिर बोल रहा हूं कि ग्लोबलाइजेशन हैज टू बी व्यूड फ्रॉम ऑल द कल्चरल ग्लोबलाइजेशन, पॉलिटिकल ग्लोबलाइजेशन, इकोनॉमिक ग्लोबलाइजेशन, क्योंकि सिंपल सिलेबस केवल इतना लिखा हुआ है इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन ऑन सोसाइटी, सो दैट इम्पैक्ट वुड बी मेनी, इट कुड बी इन्वायरमेंटल एज होगा ना, ठीक है। और इस ग्लोबलाइजेशन का एक डायमेंशन जो हो गया वो इस साल क्वेश्चन तुमसे पूछ दिया, कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है, तुम्हारे घर में कोई बच्चा है तो उसको देखो, कोई क्वेश्चन है मोबाइल का इस बार, है? तुम देख लो ना बच्चा क्या कर रहा है, लुक एट हिज बिहेवियर, है? और इसी को सोशलाइजेशन से जोड़ दिया, जोड़ दिया, जोड़ दिया बेटा। अब सोशलाइजेशन आपका वर्ड कहां से उठाया बेटा? पेपर 4 से उठाया, अगर आपको सिलेबस याद है तो, है? वहां लिखा हुआ है इनकल्केशन ऑफ वैल्यूज एंड द रोल ऑफ फैमिली, स्कूल एंड द सोसाइटी। याद आ रहा है सिलेबस? फिर बोल रहा हूं, आप टॉपिक वाइज मत पढ़िए, ठीक है? यूनिट वाइज मत पढ़िए, टॉपिक वाइज पढ़िए। कि हम सेकुलरिज्म लिए, सेकुलरिज्म का एक डायमेंशन मैंने सोशल पूरी तरह खोल दी, जहां जहां पॉलिटिकल डायमेंशन था मैंने आपको लाके वहां खड़ा कर दिया। अभी पॉलिटिकल डायमेंशन पे जब आप कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पढ़ रहे हो, प्रीएम्बल से जहां से पढ़ रहे हो, तो क्या क्या केसेस है बेयर एक्ट से देख लो, जॉक डाउन कर लो, ठीक है? तुम्हारा आंसर हमेशा हॉलिस्टिक होगा। You need to make your answer appear in such a manner that it will be making your answer different from others, है ना? अभी एक क्रॉस कल्चर डायमेंशन आपको लेना होगा, इंटर सब्जेक्ट को लाना होगा। अब केवल एक तरफ से आप चीजों को नहीं सोच सकते, क्योंकि क्वेश्चन का रेंज उसी ढंग से खुल रहा है ना। वर्क फ्रॉम होम खुले, आपसे एक क्वेश्चन पूछा है, व्हाई द सुसाइड इज इंक्रीजिंग अमंग द वुमेन, इसी साल पूछा है बेटा। पुरानी थियरी खत्म हो गई, द ओल्ड थियरी ऑफ सुसाइड सेज that women tend to commit less suicide than men, होगा ना? और लगभग हर साल 2013 से लेके हर साल पेपर 1 और पेपर 3 में आपको एक और दो क्वेश्चन वुमेन से मिलेंगे ही मिलेंगे, चाहे वो सेल्फ ग्रुप के हों, ठीक है? कभी कभी हिस्ट्री में घुस गया है वुमेन को लेके, that what roles Indian women have played in the national freedom movement in a reference to गांधी जी, ऐसा भी क्वेश्चन है बेटा, है ना? तो ये सारे डायमेंशंस को आप इशू वाइज मत देखो, ठीक है? हर टीचर आएगा, उसका अपना एक लिमिटेड सिलेबस होगा, ठीक है? आप उसके हर डायमेंशन को धीरे धीरे समझ लीजिए, और फिर आप बैठ के देखिए कि इस डायमेंशन में और कौन कौन सा का एडिंग हो सकता है, एड ऑन हो सकता है, ठीक है ना? इंटरडिसिप्लिनरी अप्रोच जब तक आपके पास नहीं होगा, बेहतर मार्क्स नहीं है, ठीक है ना? तो आपको बेहतर मार्क्स लाना है तो थोड़ा सा इस डायमेंशंस को फ्लूइड रखना है, आपके अंडरस्टैंडिंग को थोड़ा फ्लूइड रखना है, सो दैट यू विल बी एबल टू इनकॉर्पोरेट इट। क्लियर है मेरी बात यहां से? लेट्स बिगिन दैट वन, राइट डाउन फ्यू लाइंस मोर। कैन आई टेक 2 minutes?